Okay, we are live.
We are.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the show. This is The Mentionables Live. I'm, of course, Caleb Johnston. With me tonight, we have the ever wonderful...
I'm Clinton Wilcox.
And down here, I don't know what exactly is going on tonight, but we have...
Name's Joel Furchess. There might be other people around me.
Perfect. All right, glad you could join us, Joel and Clinton. Should be a fun evening tonight. We're going a little experimental and different tonight, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah,
so,
is that a Captain America? Is that a Captain America shirt you have on there?
Yeah, it's actually a jersey. So,
okay.
They had these on clearance at Walmart at one point years ago, so I picked up like every one they had. So,
is it a sports jersey or is it just like...
Yeah, it's like a jersey style. So they had like Punisher.
Well, I mean, is it for like an actual team or is it just a
no? It's Captain America one. Yeah.
Okay, so it's just kind of made in the style of a jersey then.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's nice. Of course, cool. Jerseys are comfortable. So.
Yeah.
All right, so tonight we have a video that Joel Furchess suggested we dive into and take a look at. So we have that to take a look at. We'll see how that goes. But like I said, we're really going a little experimental with Joel being in a public area. We're going to see if anybody wants to join in there. Also, we're open to completely stopping everything we have planned and just doing listener Q&A. So, like I said, tonight may get a little weird, but, weird is one of those things we've always done good at giving to the listeners. So hopefully they'll enjoy some continued weirdness.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that said...
So, real quick, we have. So I noticed we have the Freed Thinker as a commenter. Is there some reason he is just manifesting himself in the comments and is not actually appearing on camera with us?
He didn't sign up to join us for the show, so he's hanging out in the comments watching. Though that's cool. We were running late, so
yeah, that's fine too. I was just thinking, if he wants to pop on and join us, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
But otherwise, not trying to tell you your business, Tyler.
He's always welcome to join. But we're glad to have any viewers as well. And Joel is on the move, it appears. Who knows where he's moving to? And he's frozen up as usual. So that's always a good sign that the show's starting off well when Joel freezes up within the first 5 minutes.
Right. Yeah, by the way, that opening video actually played really well for me. It's that's probably the first time that it's ever just I saw it really well, no choppiness or anything. So
excellent. Yeah. We are always trying to improve quality here. So the Freed Thinker is going to be in and out, he said. So
yeah. And for some reason. And for some reason, I can't interact with the comments, and I don't know why. I don't have. Maybe it's because I'm not actually logged in.
Yeah, that's probably it. I've got access to interact, but I think that's about it. So.
Okay, because I can still interact with the private chat, between the three of us. Yeah. But for some reason, I can't interact with the comments.
Yeah, I think that's my masterful powers here on this end. So.
All right.
Well. With that, I think we're going to go ahead and give this video that Joel had suggested a shot. We're going to dive in. This appears to be, and I haven't had a chance to dive in a lot on this, and this was kind of a compilation video. So we'll start it and see how it goes. This was put together by the channel on YouTube Closer to Truth. and it's titled Fallacies in Proving God Exists. And it appears to be a compilation of a number of different speakers. And hold on, we've got him back and intact. Joel Furches.
Didn't bring the free thinker in?
He's just going to be in and out. But like we said, he's welcome to join if he wants to.
Yep.
Just the link, I can just send it to you. Just let me know if you do want to hop on here, Freed. All right. So we'll dive in and start this video and see how it goes.
All right.
Here we go.
I try to hope that God exists. So what's the worst thing that I can do? I can try to prove that God exists with proofs of God that do not work. The more I want God to exist, the more I must question proofs of God's existence. Because I root for God to be real, bad arguments for God scare me. But who knows? Maybe all the God arguments are bad. That's why I fear fallacies. What are fallacies in proving God exists? I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn, and Closer to Truth is my journey to find out.
Okay, I've never watched anything from this channel before, but so far I kind of dig it.
I have watched a few things. He's actually interviewed some well-known Christian philosophers. Like he's interviewed William Lane Craig, he's interviewed Alvin Plantinga, and a few others. I want to say Richard Swinburne too. So he's actually interviewed some Christian thinkers too on the question of does God exist?
Cool.
This video was tagged in a Twitter post. It was retweeted by the Graceful Atheist, who I recently interviewed on the show. So I've been following him on my professional feed, the Switching Side. And, you know, every time an atheist video is recommended by an atheist, I like to take a look at it.
So I don't know if I'd necessarily call this an atheist video specifically, because based on what I've seen from Robert Kuhn, he seems to be pretty fair-minded. So, I haven't seen the video yet, so I can't make any claims to it, but I would imagine it's a bit more fair-minded than actually, strictly saying that God does not exist, because the whole opening was sort of about how he's on a journey to discover truth. So I doubt it's really an atheist video that an atheist can share and say, look, this shows that God doesn't exist.
Yeah, I didn't actually have time to watch it, so I was hoping to do that tonight with you guys.
All right. Well, that's what we're doing. So we'll continue along here.
Yeah.
It's got a very PBS vibe. I like it. It takes me back.
If I'm not mistaken, I think it either does or at least has aired on PBS, actually.
Oh.
Don't quote me on that. I think it has, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
It wouldn't surprise me at this point.
I'm on hunt for fallacies in finding God. So I begin in Oxford, England, with one of the most trenchant atheists on earth, the distinguished physical chemist, Peter Atkins. In Battling Believers, Peter takes no prisoners.
Peter, I hope you don't get mad at me, but for most of my life, I've really been interested in whether God exists or not. Do you see many fallacies that people use in order to prove or demonstrate the existence of God?
Well, they must all be fallacious because there is no God. It's whether you can detect the fallacy easily enough. I mean,
Question begging.
Can he, pause real quick? Man, he doesn't seem to be the I merely lack faith in God type of atheist.
Nope. It's a hard atheist.
Yeah.
Right out. Yeah.
Right off the bat.
So I heard you cough. Was that you coughing there, Joel, or did you were you saying something?
A little bit of both. I said question begging.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Whereas a scientist would think of a first cause as a very powerful argument for the existence of God. Where did it all come from? Who started it off? Terribly difficult question. But I think that any question that is given the answer, well, God must have done it, is an abnegation of the intellect. It really is. It sounds as though it's a positive statement, but in fact, it's a camouflage of ignorance. And so it means that people have stopped thinking. And if you are confronted with the question of a first cause, where the universe comes from, don't just slip onto the feather bed of saying God did it, because that's meaningless, totally, utterly meaningless.
Yeah, just raise your hands whenever you.
Okay, yeah, because I want to make sure I don't forget what I want to say before we have a chance to stop here. So I noticed that Atkins here, who, by the way, has debated Wayne Lane Craig and lost miserably, says that positing God exists is an abnegation of intellect. But what Atkins is actually doing here is poisoning the well against theism. He says God cannot exist, therefore the answer cannot be God. As Joel said, it's question begging. And so what Atkins is doing is actually the abnegation of intellect, because he's already starting from the premise God cannot exist. So to Atkins, God cannot be the answer to any question. And so that there is an abnegation of intellect on the question of does God exist. You can't start with the answer. You have to investigate the question. So Atkins is doing what many atheists actually accuse Christians of doing.
Yeah, well put. And we discussed a good deal last week in our video, responding to Prophet of Zod. And we talked about the Kalam for a long time and really addressed that, even if that weren't the case, the Kalam, which deals with the first cause, is a powerful argument for good reasons. It's not just assuming or using it out of the gaps to kind of fill in. You're just looking at whether there is a first cause and what that cause resembles. So, it certainly is a possible answer to the question of what the first cause was. And it certainly, the conclusions from looking at that first cause begin to look very much like what we would describe as a God. Whether or not it's the Christian God's another question entirely. But that's something we looked at a great deal last week.
Right.
All right, we will continue along.
What scientists have got to do is to trace causes back to their origin and find a mathematical theory of the emergence of the universe. I hope that will prove possible. There is no evidence yet that it will not prove possible. And any scientist who says that it is impossible to account for the emergence of the universe from nothing without intervention is not being a real scientist, is just too pessimistic.
Well, right, because that's a philosophical view, not a scientific one.
Right, because we're dealing with the beginnings of time, space, and matter simultaneously.
Yeah, because if science, because he says there's no evidence that it will not prove possible. but there might one day be evidence that it won't prove possible. And if that's the case, then the only recourse you have left is philosophy. And so actually, William Lane Craig talked about this recently on a podcast, I want to say. I just lost my train of thought. Where was I going with that? It just totally evaporated from my brain. So I'll have to come back if I remember it.
Fair enough. We can hear you a little bit. Or not.
You said you can't hear me?
There we go. You were breaking up a little bit.
How about now?
Yeah, we can hear you as long as it doesn't break up.
Okay, fair enough. So I actually have a little bit of sympathy for the God of the Gaps claim, only because I can understand until
He's gone. This is working out real well for him tonight.
Right.
We'll give him just a minute to pop back since he's been popping back in here pretty quick. I want to let him finish his thought before we move on without him. But seems to be a bit of a challenge tonight.
Yeah.
So yeah, so far this is turning out a good deal better than I had expected from it initially. And of course, I was completely unfamiliar with Closer to Truth. But I can certainly respect his approach in coming at this and listening to people and really seeking truth. That's something I'm also very passionate about. So
yeah,
I like it so far. He may have a new subscriber after tonight.
Yeah, I mean, you can actually. There's a website. Yeah, Joel the Robot. I was actually thinking. I was actually about to say Joel sounds kind of like Wally right now.
He really did. But
yeah. There's actually a website you can go to for Closer to Truth, and his interviews with these Christian thinkers, especially with Alvin Plantinga, are definitely worth listening to.
Excellent. Joel, you're back.
More of an observer for this one, if things keep the way they are.
Yeah.
All right, fair enough. We'll keep rolling. Feel free to jump in when you can. So hopefully it won't boot you off again. Okay.
It only comes out when I try to participate.
Fair enough. Did you want to finish your previous thought?
I'll try. Very briefly, I was saying that the God of the Gaps, I understand how that fallacy works, and I understand how that has happened in the past, especially when, paganism was a substitute for science. But I think when we're talking about the beginning of the universe, we're talking about something that's substantially different than, say, planetary motion or, weather or how stars function or even things like quantum physics. Because if you're talking about the point at which nothing became something, then you have to transcend those, physical laws of which we are aware. And that seems to leave a foot in the door for the metaphysical, or I hate to use the word supernatural, but you understand what my point. It seems like that's an area where God fits comfortably, where other things that within the physical universe don't necessarily need a God if you allow for physical explanation. And that would, by the way, include the beginning of life. I could allow that perhaps there is a physical process by which inanimate matter becomes animate matter, although I of course tend to think that yes, that was an intervention from God, but I wouldn't be devastated to find out otherwise. But the beginning of all matter and time, that seems like a different thing.
If we look back historically, we certainly see science moving ever forward and religion, in terms of the explanatory areas that they deal with, retreating.
Yeah.
And perhaps religion is in some corner now, but they're staking out a very strong position. But let's look at the historical flow. And we have what is called God of the gaps, that every time something is not understood.
Yeah, it's an abnegation of the intellect.
And we've seen it occur in many different stages.
Yeah, every time it occurs, it's abnegation of the intellect. So take that God of the gap, take it out of your sentence and say abnegation of the intellect. That's what it is. It's people giving up trying to think and using a kind of a spell. You've got to get from point A to point B in an argument. You've got a gap. So you weave a spell, you cast a spell, and you're there.
Okay, so we touched on this briefly, and Peter Atkins, who's supposed to be an academic, is making the same mistake that Prophet of Zod was making in the video we watched last week. That the first cause argument is not a God of the gaps, because no one is saying, well, we don't know how it happened, therefore God did it. We're actually saying that all the evidence shows the universe had a beginning. Well, if something has a beginning, then there are only two possibilities. Either it created itself, but that's a logical impossibility, or something else created it. And so if the universe had a beginning in time, then something outside itself must have created the universe. And the Kalam cosmological argument doesn't specifically arrive at God as the creator. It just argues that the universe had a beginning, because all things that begin to exist have a cause, and so the universe had a cause. But we can infer certain characteristics of this first cause from the fact that the universe had a beginning. So Atkins here just making an elementary mistake about not understanding how arguments work and not understanding the argument he's trying to argue against here.
You call it God, you don't call it a spell. I don't see any part of the natural world that requires the invocation of the spell we call God.
I don't necessarily like either how he's conflating this word spell with God. This is very much the same thing that you see Aaron Ra do, where he just says, oh, that's magic. It's magic. It's magic. It's magic. It's really downplaying what we're talking about here. And they conflate these ideas so much that I think it really becomes solidified in their minds that there really is no difference between even the philosophical concept of a god and fairy tales. I honestly think they really get to the point where they believe there is no significant difference there. And I think after you kind of reach that point, it's probably hard to come back from if you're really conflating those things together that much.
Yeah, and the free thinker has a comment here. Abduction does not equal God of the gaps, but it does equal kidnapping. Okay, well, Joel got the joke. Abduction, of course, being inference to the best explanation, I think is what it is. But yeah.
Now, abduction would be more like taking bits of evidence from every jar to try to form a fuller image of what's going on. So abduction is what's done when you use, say, the cosmological argument and the teleological argument and the argument for resurrection and so forth, and say, well, we've got so many things that point to the conclusion of God, the conclusion becomes more probable.
Well, I'm glad at least he was able to finish the sentence before he disappeared. So
that would mean, I guess, that abduction would be the same thing as a cumulative case?
I think so. All right, Joe, welcome back. At least you finished on a sentence, that worked out well.
All right. Yeah, I don't think this is going to happen for me.
Just stick with it. I'm sure it's not that bad. Like we'll just roll on without you whenever you drop out.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we'll give that a shot.
All right.
Why do these issues provoke such emotion?
People are terrified, aren't they? But I don't think people should have fear about what is being discovered. I mean, maybe people should be terrified of the thought that there is no afterlife, but they should come to terms with it and enjoy the pre-afterlife rather than waiting for the non-existent afterlife.
So as we look at people who
Okay, so free thinker has my back here. Abduction is basically inference to the best explanation. Okay, so I wasn't confident enough in that to press back on Joel. So, but there we have it.
That's the great thing about having people in chat is somebody there will always push back.
Uh-huh.
That's strike 2 for you, Joel.
Oh.
See, we're going to end up trashing him tonight, whether he's here or not. So it works out really well.
Yeah, that's true.
I can't think of anything to say in my defense. That's it. I would say that that's correct, but that's not greatly different than what I was doing. I was just saying.
No, it's okay. You don't have to run away from the argument.
This may be the greatest episode ever
Right.
by far. Welcome back, Joel. That was good. All right.
I think I can time how much time I have. Let me see if I can count the seconds until I drop out again.
All right.
All right. We'll keep rolling here.
who put forth arguments for God. What is the appropriate response?
Go to a psychiatrist, I think. I think it's deeply interesting that you've got these very clever people, scientists, some of them, eminent scientists, who, even in this day and age, still believe in God. And it's quite extraordinary to me that that scientists, with the current level of understanding of the power of explanation and understanding and comprehension that science provides, that there are still people out there who think that there must be this sort of supernatural thing going on. I think they have to go to psychiatrists, really.
Well, that sounds a lot like some God delusion nonsense coming in here. I mean, we've talked about this on a number of episodes. There are significant psychological benefits to being part of a church community. Also it's definitely not on the same level of what we would consider a mental disorder, even if you look at the large numbers of the population who do believe in some sort of deity, not to mention philosophical reasons for doing so.
Yeah, this is just exceptional arrogance on the part of Peter Atkins, as if these brilliant scientists, are all deluded because they believe in God, where it's not possible that Atkins himself could be mistaken, but it's these scientists who believe in these so-called archaic Bronze Age beliefs.
Yeah.
It must be their upbringing which has given them some deep insecurity, and especially as I see not one iota of evidence in favor of it, except...
Okay, so just one more thing to comment on here. What he's saying is that Atkins, for one thing, could be projecting, because there's a lot of fear that atheists have, which could be preventing Atkins himself from seeing the truth of Christianity. Fear of living your life under a cosmic father figure who is interested in the things you do and wants you to live a certain way. So there are fears that atheists can have too, which Atkins, as a scientist, might be falling prey to. But also, he's not actually providing any sort of evidence that these scientists are wrong. All he's doing is he's emoting. He's saying that they need to go see psychologists because they have these deep-seated fears, and he's basically assuming the the psychological or emotional states, and assuming that they're negative ones, as a way to dismiss the religious beliefs of these scientists.
Yeah, that's a good point. And again, like you had kind of mentioned, very much so, that this can go both ways. I mean, certainly when I was investigating atheism, I had this drive to want it to be true for some very selfish reasons. But that was what was driving me to investigate it, is the fact that I deeply wanted it to be true. Not the fact that I wanted there to be an afterlife, but the fact that I just frankly didn't want there to be one. So I definitely think it can go the other way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, given the kind of work that I've been doing recently. Is, I mean, at some point, you desire atheism to be true, and at that point, you start deconstructing Christianity, trying to essentially debunk Christianity in order to uphold your preferred worldview.
Yeah. Now, is Peter Atkins on this whole video, or are there other atheists he's going to be interviewing here in this show?
I think there are multiple people he interviews.
Okay.
Could be wrong, though. I haven't seen the full video, but I think there's multiple people.
Okay.
Sentiment. I didn't see any part of the...
To Peter, all arguments for God are specious and fraudulent. And in dismissing theists, he is not, well, overly polite. I like Peter's spirit, small s, of course. But why can't I go all the way with his substance? In demanding natural explanations, Peter rightly hesitates at the origin of the universe. But the answer, he asserts, is surely not God. What then explains all there is?
I guess all you had to do is just wait for a few minutes.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
Is she about to try to sell me a car?
I think so. I'm going to mute this and get through the ad so we don't have to deal with it.
Okay.
Well, she's cute. I think I'll buy a car.
Right? This is why I've been teaching logic to homeschool students.
Yeah, we're close. Yeah, we're very close. It was selling car insurance.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
I just saw her in a car and I made an assumption.
Yeah, we're very close.
Very close, yeah. I mean,
right.
She's easier in the eyes than J.K. Simmons.
Peter Atkins?
That's
oh no,
true.
J.K. Simmons, who sells auto insurance for Progressive, I think.
Oh, okay.
Or no, not Progressive. Farmers Insurance, I think, is what it is.
But who wouldn't want to buy insurance from J. Jonah Jameson?
Well, that's true. I was very excited when I saw at the end of spoiler alert, but for Spider-Man Far From Home. But I was very excited in the post-credit scene to see J. Jonah Jameson back with J.K. Simmons reprising his role. That was really exciting for me, because as far as I'm concerned, as far as I'm concerned, J.K. Simmons is the definitive J. Jonah Jameson. Also, corollary, Michael Caine is the definitive Alfred Pennyworth, as far as I'm concerned.
Agreed.
He was a good Alfred Pennyworth, but he didn't reflect the one in the comics. He was a unique version. Kind of the same way that Heath Ledger was a unique version of Joker that was different than what you'd find in the comics. That is not to say they did a bad job. They did an excellent job with their version of the character.
Yeah, I thought Michael Caine was a fabulous Alfred. Now, I also haven't read the comics, so I'm just going by all the versions that I have seen in the various television shows and movies. Sure. He's my favorite. Yeah. Jeremy Irons is my least favorite Alfred. So, yeah. Like his Alfred is totally devoid of any humor. So, yeah.
Well, before we go too far off track, but hey, your video and sound is coming in better, Joel.
Yeah.
I switched to a different device.
Okay. Perfect. All right.
Not getting any sound.
Oh. Well, it would have helped.
We have subtitles, so what are we going to listen to?
I turned the sound off for the ad, so
Okay.
my fault. Forgot to turn it back on.
No worries.
I ask an atheistic physicist who has made it his mission to show that God does not exist.
Oh, Victor Stenger.
Victor Stenger says that quantum physics and cosmology demonstrate God's absence. How so?
Vic, you believe that God does not exist, and huge numbers of people, including many scientists, certainly philosophers and theologians, believe God does exist. What are the kinds of arguments that they use to show God exists that you think are fallacies?
The classic argument.
You know, I will say, I love this guy's questions.
Yeah, I've definitely enjoyed watching his various interviews, but we're about to get some Thomas Aquinas hate here. I'm gonna have to buckle up.
All right, seatbelt time.
Right.
Arguments go back to Thomas Aquinas and his 5 different proofs, and they all basically amounted to the same thing, that you needed somebody to start the universe going, you needed to cause a first mover, and so on. In modern terms, this is stated as the Kalam cosmological argument. It comes from Islamic sources, but it's been modernized.
Okay, so yeah, his 5 proofs do not all argue the same thing. His first way does argue from the prime mover. His 5th way. Now, I'm not an expert on Aquinas, but I do actually have a very nice version of the Summa Theologiae, which I just happen to have near me because I want to read through it. So I do have that, and I could actually look up the 5 ways if we wanted to go through them. But the 5th way I remember has to do with animals and animals like bees and how they do not have a rational intellect, and yet they still know by nature certain things that they have to do, such as pollinate flowers, protect the queen, things like that. And so his 5th way has to do with the non-rational things that animals do simply by nature, and there has to have been someone who established that nature. Again, I'm not an expert, so I couldn't replicate it. I could look it up if we were really curious. But yeah, it's definitely not true to say that all of his 5 ways basically argue the same thing.
And also, the Kalam cosmological argument is in no way characteristic of Aquinas's.
Right. It's actually, actually, that's a great point, because it's actually kind of in conflict with it, because the Kalam argument argues from a first cause. Aquinas's argument doesn't. In fact, the universe could actually be eternal, and Thomas Aquinas's first way still would go through. He doesn't necessitate a universe with a beginning like the Kalam argument does. Right, and he says prime mover. That's Aristotle, not Aquinas. Well, no, it's based on Aristotle, though. Thomas Aquinas' first way is the argument for motion, that everything moves, everything that moves is put in motion by another, and that argues to God as the prime mover, the one that's kind of at the beginning of this chain of things that move. All right, that's fair. Yeah, that's only the first way, though. Aquinas, I think it's his third way, is actually an argument from contingency. Also, so yeah, so they are different, even though a few of them might be similar, but yeah. Yeah, it's too bad we didn't get Nick in on this one. He actually argues from Aquinas in his argument for the existence of God. Yeah, I actually wouldn't mind doing a show on Aquinas' 5 ways. I mean, I could think of some other people that we could invite on too, people that I go to when I have questions about Aquinas, because I consider myself a Thomistic, Thomist Aristotelian person when it comes to my metaphysical view. And so, hold up, and you haven't even gotten all the 5 ways memorized? Well, no, I'm also not a philosopher. My specialization is in bioethics, not in philosophy. So, but my bioethics is grounded in Thomistic Aristotelian metaphysics, though. So, but yeah, I guess you could say I'm a bad Thomist because I haven't memorized all of his 5 ways. Bad Thomist. You go in the penalty box, bro. All right, 5 minutes. 5-minute penalty.
All right. Well, Freed left another comment here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so closer to truth. So I'm going to go talk to atheistic fundamentalist. Yeah, I think he's on point here. Seems to be what he's done.
Yeah, that was something I actually wanted to mention from the beginning too. Was that for some reason Robert Kuhn was saying, I want to believe God exists, but the more I want to believe, the more I should doubt the arguments for his existence, or something like that. And that seemed like, even though I think Robert Kuhn really often comes across as pretty reasonable, pretty fair-minded, that really seemed like convoluted thinking to me. Because for example, myself, I think evidence for God is basically overwhelming. I think you can just look at the tree outside and you could conclude that God exists just from pondering the existence of that tree. We all inherently have what John Calvin and Alvin Plantinga, who's a modern Reformed philosopher, would call the sensus divinitatis. That we all have an inherent belief that God exists, and so I think it's actually really easy to show that God exists, and I don't, and I think that if you're trying to go to such great lengths to prove that God doesn't exist in order to believe that he does, I think that's a wrong-headed approach to trying to come to truth on the matter.
I think that's fair. I'm not sure. I'm not sure we would agree necessarily on what exactly is overwhelming evidence, but I certainly think that it's enough to borderline shift the burden of proof in this case, because
yeah, I mean, that's just my take on things. I mean, obviously, I don't think every Christian would agree that the evidence is overwhelming. Because I also do sympathize to some atheistic arguments, like the argument from evil and the argument from divine goodness. There are things I still struggle with as a Christian, but I think that the evidence for God heavily weighs in favor of God's existence. And so, and considering that the evidence is so strong, and considering that Christianity actually offers good responses to the arguments from evil and divine hiddenness, I think really shows that God exists. And even though I can't have 100% what they call Cartesian certainty on it, I'm very confident that God exists.
What makes me wonder is, what is it that makes a person come to a position on God's existence if they aren't themselves interested in religion? I mean, there are plenty of people, possibly a equal number of irreligious people to religious people, that don't really take a strong position on what God's like and if he exists and so forth. But there are, a small subset of humans that actually take a strong position on things religious, that position being atheism or agnosticism, something that says, I have a position on God's existence and it isn't a favorable one. And what is it that causes a person to come to those conclusions and then sustain those conclusions?
you may have found your next project, Joel.
Well, that is part of my current project, honestly, because, we understand what makes a person religious, but what makes a person strictly irreligious and what sustains that irreligion. And in my mind, it would be it's a reaction to religion itself. I doubt in a vacuum, divorced from any kind of religious environment, that you'd have any atheists or agnostics. It just wouldn't be a position to take. In some sense, atheism and agnosticism and other types of irreligious philosophy are in a tango with religion itself. They exist within relationship to one another. So that, for instance, in my field, when people deconvert, they don't, in fact, move away from religion. They take another relationship with religion. I like to compare it to a relationship between an ex-husband and an ex-wife. They're still exes. There's still a way in which their marriage persists into their current relationship, but it's unfavorable. They have a very different position on one another than they did prior to the breakup.
But the question is, do all their exes live in Texas?
I don't know. Texas doesn't seem like the intuitive place for an atheist ex to live.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, we're going to continue.
All right.
And it goes something like this. Number one, everything that begins has a cause. Number two, the universe had a beginning. So number three, therefore it follows that the universe had a cause.
Okay, so what was so funny? It sounded like he represented the argument fairly well. Maybe I missed something though.
Let's see.
Well, he did the classic thing. Everything that begins has a cause. It's everything that begins to exist.
I mean, that's the same thing, though. Yeah, I mean, at least he's not falling into the atheist straw man, which says everything has a cause. He at least added everything that begins has a cause. So I think he's at least representing the argument better than a lot of atheist lay people do.
That's fair, but he's also he's turning Aquinas into William Lane Craig.
Oh well, yeah, definitely.
Which he definitely was not.
Right. Yeah.
So he's kind of conflated all cosmological arguments into a single cosmological argument represented by the Kalam.
Yeah, exactly. He's definitely conflating arguments here. This is Craig's formulation, which was actually begun by a Muslim philosopher, Al-Ghazali, I think. Who may have been a contemporary of Thomas Aquinas. I'm not sure of the dates there, but yeah, he's definitely conflating different arguments and attributing it to the wrong people.
And as Thomas Aquinas always said, and that's what we know as God. Well, let's look at each of those. First of all, is the argument that everything that begins has a cause. That's, in fact, not true. We can think of many examples in modern physics where events occur in an uncaused way, an unpredetermined way. One example would be the excited atom, where the electron is in a higher energy level. It drops down to a lower energy level, and there's nothing in physics that tells us when a particular.
Is it tea time?
So this is what I suspected he would do. He's saying that everything that begins has a cause, and so he's talking about a state change here. We can think of plenty of things that begin. For instance, Friends back in the 90s began to exist, begin to exist, but it began, and it had a cause other than God, and then it ran 10 seasons and it ended, which must have been Satan. No, it's everything that begins to exist, and that's a very specific kind of beginning. It used to not exist, now it does exist, and that's different than a state change, which is a rearrangement or reformulation of things that already exist. And so he's going to go through a bunch of scientific explanations for things that begin, but not things that begin to exist, which is a big difference.
Yeah, if that's his move, then that's definitely strawmanning the argument also. And yeah, this is a common tactic I've seen from physicists, and of course William Lane Craig, who defends this argument a lot, addresses these kinds of claims too. But I recently watched a video of Cameron Bertuzzi interviewing on his podcast Capturing Christianity, interviewing Tim McGrew on logic. And this was actually a point that Tim McGrew brought up. He said that we can actually not straw man, but steel man, which is kind of the opposite of a straw man, where you make an argument stronger. We can steel man the Kalam cosmological argument, because the way that Dr. Craig has it formulated is in the form of a categorical syllogism. All things that begin to exist have a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. We could actually restate the argument not in a categorical syllogism, but we can actually state it in the form of modus ponens. And instead of talking about all things, we can just talk about the universe existing. So we can actually adjust the argument to say, if the universe began to exist, then the universe had a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. The conclusion, therefore the universe had a cause. So that would be a way to steelman it. And that way, physicists could not then go into these, talking about subatomic atoms and how they allegedly begin to exist without a cause, which of course Dr. Craig would argue isn't the case. But in this case, if we steelman the Kalam argument in the form that Tim McGrew stated it as a form of modus ponens, that'll do away with all these irrelevant considerations that physicists might try to bring up. And now we can just focus on the universe specifically.
That's interesting. I'm not sure which version I like better. I think Craig's version has maybe more of a wider appeal. So a general audience may be able to relate to that more. But I definitely like that change as well.
Yeah, it makes the argument stronger, and it makes it more difficult to refute, because now instead of talking universally about a universal principle that nothing can begin to exist without a cause, now we're just talking about one specific thing, the universe. And if the universe began to exist, it must have had a cause. So that's why Tim was arguing it actually makes the argument stronger, because now you don't have to defend the principle that all things that begin to exist have a cause. You can just talk about the one thing, which is the universe, which is the thing in question.
I'm not sure that that's a steelman, though, because then you jump to that cause must be God. Is that the next move he makes?
Well, no, because we're still talking about the KCA, the Kalam cosmological argument. If premise one, if the universe began to exist, then the universe had a cause. Premise two, the universe began to exist. The conclusion, the universe had a cause. So it's still arguing the same thing the original Kalam cosmological argument does. It's just focusing on one specific thing, the universe, instead of all things beginning to exist. So yeah, so it still draws the same conclusion at the end.
All right. That's fair.
All right. Freed Thinker also chimed in. He also shows that he doesn't really understand philosophical concepts. Causation and determinism are not the same thing. Just because X is indeterminate to E, and E doesn't mean X isn't a cause. Not E doesn't mean X isn't a cause.
Yeah, the tilde before E is a negation. So E and not E.
Not E doesn't mean X isn't a cause. So let me repeat that. Just because X is indeterminate to E and not E doesn't mean X isn't a cause.
All right, I nominate Clinton to read all the comments from here on out.
Fair enough. All right.
Well, at least if Tyler is going to start using symbolic logic on us, I could read and translate for you guys. But
right.
Hey, we don't know that's Tyler. It's just some guy named Free Thinker.
Oh, Free Thinker.
It could be any thinker. Yeah, it could be any thinker that's also freed.
Oh, is he trying to be anonymous?
Who knows who's hacked it?
That's right. Yeah.
All right.
So it's definitely very obvious here that he's talking to atheistic scientists and not philosophers, and especially scientists who don't seem to have much, if at all, philosophical training, especially in logic. Because with Peter Atkins, he's talking about trying to talk about fallacious arguments, and doesn't realize the fallacious moves that he's making in trying to respond to these arguments. So one wonders how rigorous their scientific education was if they're making these simple mistakes, and confusing Thomas Aquinas with Thomas Aquinas's cosmological argument, or really it's the argument for motion, with William Lane Craig's Kalam cosmological argument, is kind of a basic mistake too.
A transition will happen. Therefore, the first axiom of the cosmological argument has to fail. It fails the second hypothesis as well.
Proposition
that the universe had a beginning.
What was that, Clinton?
Oh, I was just saying premise is the word he was looking for.
Yeah.
Beginning. Now, the argument is usually given that the Big Bang shows that the universe has a beginning. Well, in fact, all it shows is that the universe that we have now exploded from some tiny pocket 13.7 billion years ago, but we don't know that there wasn't anything before that. In fact, there are theories, models that provide a mechanism for the universe having tunneled through from a previous universe.
What are some?
Yeah, and
just push the problem back a step.
Yeah, and a lot of those theories have been coming up again and again and again in cosmology. So this big kind of oscillation of the universe. Many years ago, this was one of the leading theories in astrophysics before, we got to the current hypothesis that we have of the Big Bang, because people kept trying to come up with an explanation that was somewhere along these lines, but the evidence just kept pushing towards this Big Bang, this simultaneous existence of time, space, and matter. So, the evidence just doesn't kind of support this theory, and it hasn't every time it's come up in the past.
Yeah, and it's a simple rule of logic too, that simply by bringing up possible alternatives, you're not refuting an argument. You have to have some reason to think that there is some merit to these hypotheses, not just that they are brought up by atheistic physicists who are trying to avoid the implications of God existing. In fact, Alexander Vilenkin is a physicist who has come out on Craig's side when Dr. Craig has responded to these physicists who try to bring up these fanciful alternatives to the Big Bang, essentially, where the universe had a beginning in time. And Vilenkin has actually stated, and I'm not an expert on physics either, so I can't give all the science behind it. But Alexander Vilenkin has actually written that it's basically inescapable now, and physicists have to come to grips with the fact that the universe had a beginning. It's based on I think it was like the Born-Guth-Vilenkin theorem that he and two other physicists came up with, has basically proven scientifically that the universe had a beginning in time.
Yeah, I read more Hugh Ross, and he's an astrophysicist, and same thing. There's just not another plausible way around this, and people have tried.
Yeah.
Others. Design argument.
Okay, let's just look at the world around us. How could all of this have happened by accident? I don't know how to explain it. Therefore, it must have some supernatural origin. Well, that's basically an argument from ignorance. And it turns out that when you look very closely at it, it not only doesn't look designed, it looks just like it should look if it wasn't designed. You find that the data that we take in cosmology fit very well to a purely naturalistic picture. So there's no reason why the universe can't be self-sustainable, self-organizing. And besides, if God created the universe, and who created God? God is really no explanation.
Yeah. This is a question that I posed as a joke when I walked in on an apologist giving a lecture, because it's not a serious criticism. And and just like Peter Atkins, Victor Stenger here is totally misrepresenting and misunderstanding the Christian arguments, especially the argument from design. Philosophers don't just look around and say, "Oh, how could all of this come about by accident?" They have actual reasons for postulating that it couldn't have come about. William Paley, for example, had his watchmaker argument, and now William Lane Craig would say that William Paley's argument kind of fell out of vogue once evolution became more popular. But William Paley had reasons for arguing that the universe appears designed. In fact, even Richard Dawkins, in his book The God Delusion, says that one stance biologists take is called the design stance, because living things and things in biology do appear as if they're designed, but really they're not. So we have to look at them as if they're designed, even though they're really not designed. So I think Victor Stenger is just wrong when he says that the universe appears as it would be if it wasn't designed. And of course, just like Peter Atkins, he's not actually presenting any evidence for his claims. He's just asserting it.
Right. And one of the things that you find is that if you were to take a scientist like this gentleman, or just any scientist, and you were to put forward questions to them about natural things, and have to ask them to come up with quick conclusions, like put them on a timer, so they had to jump to a quick answer. What you're going to find is that they tend to default back to design. There is this inherent sort of intuition in human nature that things exist for a reason or a purpose. We inferred a reason and purpose, just as part of who it is to be a human. So when you're a scientist and you have to kind of constantly remind yourself not to jump to this to this conclusion that there is cause, meaning, purpose, and so forth behind things, you just kind of have to keep yourself in that headspace that everything can't be said to be meaningful or purposeful until you find out that it is through other means.
By the way, I just noticed this. This is episode 901. I'm assuming that means season 9, episode 1. Not that there have been 900 episodes before this. I
think you're correct there. I don't think there have been quite that many. I could be wrong though.
Yeah, I just
You'd be having to churn them out like several a day.
Right. Yeah.
No kidding.
Well, I mean, I guess it depends also on how long the show's been running.
That's true. Now, before we move on, I kind of toss this back to you, Clinton. So you said that, this claim that, well, if God created the universe, what created God? We kind of laughed about it a little bit, but maybe a listener doesn't know exactly why this is such a kind of comedic response it garners, because it is something that comes up from atheists rather regularly. Could you just give the listeners a little bit of why this is kind of fallacious reasoning? What's wrong with it?
Well, sure. And again, I'm gonna channel William Lane Craig here, because when it comes to philosophical arguments, he's one of the ones that I know the best, because I've read several of his books and I've listened to his podcasts and a lot of his lectures. So I know his responses pretty well. He's I don't agree with him on everything. I'm not a Molinist, for example. I am a Thomist, like I said. But he's a philosopher of science. So when it comes to interacting with the science, he knows what he's talking about. He's coming at it from a position of expertise. And so, who designed the designer is a question that's similar to the question of who created the creator. Essentially, they're both just silly rejoinders from an uninformed atheist who isn't listening when a Christian is offering evidence. When he asks who designed the designer, number one, there's nothing that says everything has to be designed. All we're saying is the universe has the appearance of design. And if the universe has the appearance of design, then it follows that there would be a designer, especially if it was designed. Now, again, like I said, William Lane Craig and others might say that William Paley's argument has kind of fallen by the wayside when Darwin came around and really popularized evolution with his theory of natural selection. So the teleological argument that's in vogue now is the fine-tuning argument, where the initial conditions of the universe were so minutely fine-tuned that it would have been impossible for the universe to have existed this way unless there was someone who actually fine-tuned the constants just right. So that's the teleological argument that's in vogue today. But when we talk about the design argument, asking who designed the designer, you don't really need to have an explanation for the designer. Essentially, if an archaeologist is digging in Mexico somewhere, or in South America or wherever, and happens to unearth an arrowhead or something like that, he'll recognize the arrowhead as something having been designed. He's not going to deny that it was something that was designed just because he can't account for the designer, the person who designed it. Well, so who designed the designer would just be a nonsensical question. It's not something that's even very important, because you don't have to, the designer of something did not, for one thing, the designer would not himself had to have been designed in order to design something. But number two, you don't even have to really have an explanation for the designer to be able to recognize that something is designed.
Well, there's a little more to it than that, because the argument itself is, again, this is the argument he's talking about, is the beginning of the universe. The universe had to have some kind of cause. And so this who designed the designer thing is more or less mocking that sort of reasoning, because Again, his line was everything has a cause. Well, if everything has a cause, then the designer must have a cause. That designer must have a cause, and so forth. He's just pointing out how absurd it is to say that everything has a cause. And so this is a misunderstanding of the argument, because it's not saying that everything has a cause, just those things which begin to exist. And so he even said everything that begins has a cause, the idea being that God didn't begin. Now, you could move that forward and say, well, what about the universe? Maybe the universe didn't begin, and therefore it doesn't require a cause. And that's fine. That's kind of the line that's been held about the universe, is the universe is eternal. And that's been the line that's been held for most of human history, is that the universe must be eternal. As soon as we come to a universe which has a beginning, then we allow the concept that there might be a God, but then they push that back and say, well, who designed God?
Right. And of course, outside of time, we just don't know that these same laws we understand within our own universe would exist outside of it, because if you have no time, then the law of causality just breaks down. So
I'm not sure, because someone like William Lane Craig would make a distinction between temporal causality and sort of like I'm not sure what the actual term for it would be, but like a causality priority. Whereas, because the universe, before the universe existed, God existed, but God existed in a timeless state before the universe was created, because all time began at the Big Bang. So God still created despite living in a timeless state. So in that case, God did not exist temporally prior to the universe, because that would be nonsensical. God existed in a timeless state, but he did. He was the cause. He has priority over the universe, in that he existed metaphysically prior to the universe. And so in that case, there's a distinction there to be made. And so so the laws would be different in a timeless state, but there could still be causality. It's just, it would be different than we understand it, because we live in time. We think of things as having a time. Bob goes into work at 8, starts turns on the factory and the conveyor belts and everything, constructs a car, and everything is done, and the car is done by 10 p.m. or I don't know how long it takes to make a car. But in that case, we think of causality temporally, because Bob got into work, and everything kind of had like a temporal chain, because there was Bob, the car didn't exist, nothing had been set in motion, Bob set it in motion, and all of this kind of had a temporal chain there. And that would be, of course, missing when we talk about God, who existed timelessly prior to the conception of the universe. That's
a good example, I think.
Yeah, thanks. I just kind of came up with it. I'm not a car guy, so it's like maybe I should have come up with something a little more in my wheelhouse, like writing a song or something. But But then there is also something more to be said here, in that there are certain things which are metaphysically necessary, like the laws of logic. So even if we have a universe that didn't exist, the laws of logic would still hold. And so even if the conditions would have been different in a different universe, or before the universe began to exist, the laws of logic would remain constant. And so we can still make logical claims about something outside our universe, if such a thing exists. Because the laws of logic are necessarily, they cannot be false. So they hold true in every possible world.
Yeah, I think this is best understood in terms of contingency, which I think is the better formulation of this idea, that everything that exists is either contingent upon something else, or it is existent unto itself. And so this is sort of what you have to wrestle with, is that either the universe is self-existent, it doesn't rely on anything outside of itself for its existence, or it's contingent upon something else. And so if you make the thing that it's contingent upon God, then you still leave the option open that God perhaps is self-existent and not contingent, in which case this question of who designed the designer is unnecessary because there's a second option on the table. Now, of course, the argument, assumably, the argument would be that no, the universe is not contingent; it is self-existing. But the problem that you have there, of course, is the universe is changing, and so you would have to argue some kind of change that began or is eternally in the past.
All right, I think we beat that horse pretty good.
Yeah, the only thing worse than beating a dead horse is betting on one.
That's the second episode in a row where you've played that joke.
Oh, did I say that last time? Okay, I thought I did. I wasn't sure if it was on this show or.
If we can get it one more time in a row, you'll have a trifecta.
I'll have a trifecta. Yep.
For the existence of the universe, it just puts back the explanation one layer.
At its ultimate, you have to come in one way or another to something that's defined as self-existing, which is the traditional definition of God.
Yeah, no, right. I mean, if God, but you see the logic of it. Once you accept the fact that it's possible to have something that was not created,
yes,
then you have to pick something.
Yeah, if we keep stopping every 20 seconds or so, we're never going to get through the video. So I'll try to keep this quick.
That's all right. This may be a two-parter already anyway.
Okay, but I did want to comment on what he's talking about here, that it is entirely possible. He's absolutely right. If you accept that God always existed, that there is, that God is something that has always existed, then
could be.
Then of course there is. Oh, it's okay. Don't interrupt me, Victor. I guess I should say Dr. Stanger. I'll be the I'll go more formal there. But yeah, so if we accept the existence of a God who exists forever, then absolutely, it's possible there are other things that have existed forever. The universe could be something that has existed forever. That's certainly a possibility, and I don't think any Christian thinkers would deny that. What the argument is, though, is that the evidence shows that the universe is not eternal. The evidence shows that the universe had a beginning in time. Again, Thomas Aquinas' argument for motion considers when the universe began irrelevant. The universe could have been eternal, and Aquinas' argument for motion still be successful. It's just that modern cosmology has shown that the universe did, in fact, have a beginning in time. So that's why certain philosophers now will argue that since the universe had a beginning, then the universe began to exist. Now, so it's not a case of special pleading where we say God has always existed, and then the universe must have had a beginning, because you can't have two things that have always existed. That's not what we're arguing. So there's no special pleading going on. We're just saying that the evidence for the universe shows that it had a beginning in time, and we do have good independent reasons for thinking that God is metaphysically necessary, that he has always existed. One of those things being that that the Kalam cosmological argument, for example, shows that since all time, space, and matter began at the Big Bang, then God must be a timeless, spaceless, and immaterial thing. And so immaterial things, they don't die. They're immaterial. So there's that. There's also other things, like you have the ontological argument formulated by Anselm, which argues that God is the greatest conceivable being, and as God is or what we might say is a maximally great being. And so in order to be maximally great, you have to have all great making properties to their maximal extent, which means that God has existed forever. Now, of course, some philosophers have argued that existence isn't a predicate, so there's a discussion to have there. But there are good. In fact, the argument from contingency even shows that God must have been eternal, because in fact, the argument from motion actually, I think, shows that too. Because in order for something contingent, or something that's contingent, means that it does not have to exist. There will be some point at which it will cease to exist, or there's some point in the past at which it didn't exist but it exists now. It's just something that's contingent doesn't have to exist. And so in order for there to be something at the beginning of this chain of contingent things, there must be something that is not contingent, something that is necessary, and that's what we call God. Because if God was contingent, he would require something to have begun begun him as well. So to avoid an infinite regress, there must have been something necessary at the beginning of this chain of contingency. So we have good independent reasons for thinking that God himself has existed forever. And now we have good reason to doubt that the universe has existed forever. So again, it's not special pleading. We're just following the evidence where it leads.
The universe.
Yep.
It's
Didn't want to cut you off there, Joel. Do you have something else or just a yep?
That was just a yep.
Okay.
Yep. You just pick what you want, but you got to pick something.
right. So, and the simplest thing to do is to pick the universe. So,
No first cause argument for God, no design argument. But why the laws of quantum physics, Vic? Where did the laws come from? There's always residual, always something unexplained and supposedly unexplainable. But lack of explanation does not justify fallacies. Fallacies are just sloppy thinking. Arguments for God can be complex. So often only a philosopher can follow its tortuous trails of semantics and rhetoric. I meet atheistic philosopher Michael Tooley. Michael, let me tell you.
Incidentally, I've actually met Michael Tooley.
Name dropper.
Sorry, I just I guess okay. Sorry, no, I wasn't trying to. No, because I mean, Michael Tooley is much smarter than I am. Like I'm not trying to say that I'm in the same intellectual league as Michael Tooley. He's a very smart guy. But
No, I was sitting over here being secretly jealous.
Okay. Actually, and actually, when I met Michael, now he's debated William Lane Craig too, and I don't think I've ever actually seen that debate, so I'm not sure how. I'm sure he did pretty well because he's a very smart philosopher. But yeah, the first time I ever saw Michael Tooley, which I don't remember if it was when I met him in person or if I'd seen him previous to that, but he immediately reminded me of Colin Mockery. I don't know if you know who Colin Mockery is, but if you've ever seen Whose Line Is It Anyway? He's one of the comedians on that show.
Fun anecdote.
That's all I have to say. So.
All right.
Little secret. I would love to believe in the existence of God for a whole host of reasons. But every time I hear the arguments of theists, I may believe in their conclusion, but I'm discouraged by their arguments. As a philosopher, how do you look upon some of the methodologies that theists use to prove the existence of God?
One thing that happens quite frequently is that something's put forward as an argument in support of the existence of God, but it's really, if it's a proof of something very different. So, for example, you have arguments for a first cause, arguments for an on-move mover, arguments for a being that's necessary and has necessity of itself, okay, right? If you look at those arguments, right, some of those don't even give you a reason for believing in a personal sort of being, right? I mean, the first cause could be something purely physical, right? So you don't even get an argument for a personal God, let alone a God, for example, who's omnipotent, omniscient, and let alone an argument for a God who's good or perfectly good, right? So some arguments are fallacious simply because they don't bear upon certain crucial properties of God, like being a personal God or being morally perfect. Other problems arise in arguments that appeal to personal religious experiences, right? And so a Christian may appeal to his or her personal religious experience.
Yeah, so I just wanted to quickly point out that Tooley is absolutely right here, that a number of theistic arguments don't argue for a personal God. For example, the Kalam cosmological argument doesn't arrive at a personal God. The argument from fine-tuning doesn't arrive at a personal God. It just arrives at something that began the constants here. And so a number of these arguments don't arrive at a personal God, but we would say that they're actually used in a cumulative case for God's existence. So the Kalam argument and the design argument may not argue for a personal God on their own, but taken together, as Joel was talking about earlier, if we take all of these arguments together, then they do arrive at a personal God. So we would say that, for example, the Kalam argument, while not arguing for a creator, a personal creator, it is consistent with Christianity, because Christianity teaches that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So the KCA is certainly compatible and consistent with Christianity. So even though it doesn't arrive at a personal God, it can be used in a cumulative case to show that there is a personal God at the beginning of the creation of the universe.
True. I would agree with that.
Experiences for believing that God exists or that Jesus is the Son of God and so on. And what's overlooked here is that people in other religions have experiences that are really quite comparable and that lead to conflicting conclusions, right? And so a person who's a Muslim has religious experiences that lead him or her to believe in the existence of Allah, defined as a purely monotheistic, non-Trinitarian God, right? People in Eastern religions have experiences that are compatible with polytheism, etc., right? And so typically people focus upon their own experiences and don't take into account at all the fact that other people have different experiences, leading to conclusions inconsistent with the ones they're trying to draw.
One can argue, though, that there is a commonality between all of those views that is something so intrinsic to human nature that senses that there is something transcendent, something that is of a non-physical character.
Well, that's an interesting, important response. I mean, suggesting that there's, so to speak, a core, okay, right, that is the same between the different experiences, and that it, so to speak, leads to valid conclusions, right? But if you look at the parts that disagree, what you find is they're heavily dependent upon the culture in which one is raised, right? If you're raised in India, the probability you would have a vision of the Virgin Mary would not be very high, whereas you're raised in Spain, it might be much higher, right? So what we know is that a person's culture, the family in which he or she was raised, has a real impact upon the content of the experience, right? And the question is whether, given that so, it's reasonable to believe that nonetheless there is a core that's reliable.
Okay. We have more ads. Oh, read the Bible. Here we go.
I'll take care of that for us.
All right.
Yay!
Yeah, like I said, Michael Tooley is a brilliant philosopher. In fact, when I've actually heard other Christian apologists speak very highly of Tooley, that he's one of the best living atheistic philosophers today. So a lot of what Tooley says is true. But there is that. This is actually one reason why we would say that an argument from personal experience is bad, because a whole host of different religions have people with personal experiences. This is an argument that Mormons rely heavily on. That they have the burning in the bosom, so to speak, and that's how they know God exists. And so one's personal experience might be evidence for them, but it's not really evidence. For anyone else that God exists, because experiences are very subjective things.
Clinton, did you know
one
who
thing
that commercial was for that just popped up?
What's that?
The Church of Latter-day Saints.
Oh no, that was just that was a happy accident, a coincidence, because Tooley's argument just reminded me of discussions I've had with Mormons on about religion, about Christianity. So
this is a very interesting video for them to have that ad in.
Right.
And well placed within the video too.
Yeah.
I was going to say that while I don't think the argument from personal experience is something that can just be laid out on the table and taken as is, the fact is, if somebody is telling you they had a personal experience, there is something that is motivating them to tell you that. And so either they're lying to you or they actually believe they had an experience. If you rule out lying, then you have to figure out what accounts for their impression of having had an experience and what they actually experienced. And this is where phenomenology as a psychological approach comes into place. You have to figure out exactly what the experience that they had and the circumstances surrounding that experience. So arguments from experience are not nothing, but they take a lot more work than a logical argument would, because you have to actually dig into the history and environment of the individual who's having that experience in order to see what's going on. But that claim is not vacuous. It doesn't mean nothing. The claim is being made, and there is something motivating the individual for making that claim.
Yeah. Joel seems to have fallen through a portal into Flatland.
Are you not hearing me?
Oh no! I was just joking because you've got your camera turned off.
Okay, well,
And so I was commenting on how there's like a no. I was just commenting on how there's like a 2-dimensional figure now on your screen. So I was
yeah, it
assuming.
was freaky here. Everything was just lines around me.
Right. Okay.
All right, what's on your shirt tonight, Joe?
This says Miskatonic University Department of Astrophysics, devouring worlds since the dawn of time.
And you're wearing that at a Bible conference of some kind?
Shut up. Nobody knows what it is. Nobody
Right.
reads T-shirts here unless they like have a picture of a cross, and bloody hands, or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure no one there has probably read H.P. Lovecraft either.
No, if it has the name of a university on it, that immediately their brain shuts off and they're not interested in reading the rest.
Yeah, that's true.
Fair
Hey,
enough.
yeah, sir, are you presenting? Yeah, I'm here on behalf of Miskatonic University.
Yeah, and
There is nothing. Everything is pointless. The end.
nobody reads college shirts, and that's a way for us Lovecraft fans to just kind of blend into society with only dog whistling to one another.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. How are y'all on time? Y'all want to continue, or shall we turn this into a two-parter?
I'm good to keep going if we all have time. I'm actually enjoying watching the video and responding.
Me too.
Yeah, I just got into the show right now, so
All
I'd be
right.
ashamed to end it.
Fantastic. We'll keep going then.
All right. So how far are we? Okay,
We're
so we're
over
about
the halfway
11 minutes or so.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, we're not getting the sound again, Caleb.
Oh no, I muted it for the ad again and forgot. That's 2 times now. If I screw up again,
3 strikes and you're out, buddy.
yep.
Ads in, Caleb. Ads in.
Ads if.
Look, I did it
Offended when
again.
believers spout off so-called proof that while I... Is it odd that while I want to believe in God, I also want to expose these fallacies? No. I am offended when believers spout off so-called proofs of God that are patently absurd.
But these arguments
Fallacies are my enemy.
What
They
was that?
undermine belief.
I was just saying these arguments aren't patently absurd. These scientists' understanding of the arguments are patently absurd.
Yeah, we're getting straw mans of every argument now that I think about it.
Right. He should have just had the whole episode just talking to Michael Tooley. He's at least a philosopher and understands these philosophical arguments.
Yeah. No, he's approaching atheists to give characterizations of Christian arguments, which isn't how it's done.
No, but it also shows that there are some atheist scientists who cannot pass the ideological Turing test.
Oh yeah, I hear what you're saying. I do. Which was the argument Michael Tooley was characterizing again?
Well, he talked about. He talked at length about the argument from personal experience, but he touched on a couple before that. I didn't. Oh no. Yeah, he touched on a couple arguments. I didn't hear any massive mistakes from Tooley, and I wouldn't expect to because he's a professional philosopher. But yeah, he just kind of talked about how these arguments don't argue for a personal God, and that's the main issue with these arguments. Which of course, I mentioned that's because we use them as a cumulative case. We don't just use them to stand on their own. So that was what Tooley was really talking about, is just how these arguments don't argue for a personal creator. And then to try and argue for a personal creator, they argue from personal experience. But again, you have people of all different faiths who have their own religious experiences related to their faith. And so that was what Tooley was really responding to there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually kind of disappointed that he seems to have gotten the least amount of time so far in these interviews.
Yeah, that was like just a couple minutes compared to everybody else's segment.
Yeah.
That he just said about I'm offended when bad arguments are given, etc. That was the part that the graceful atheist was quoting when he linked this video in his tweet. You know, he said that all Christians should watch this so that they don't give these terrible arguments.
Oh,
Nice.
yeah, no, the real takeaway should be don't get your arguments from Victor Stenger or Peter Atkins.
Belief like evil demons. That's why I hate these fallacies. I want to find them and I want to kill them. So I search for more. I meet Duke philosopher Walter Sinnott Armstrong, a font of anti-God fallacies.
Walter, you don't believe in God, right?
Not only do I not believe in God, I believe God does not exist.
Okay, good. You have spent part of your career, small part, but a part, looking at the arguments of some pretty smart people who believe in the existence of God, right?
Yes.
What are some of the fallacies that you see in those arguments?
One example is what I call the fallacy of bloated conclusions. You get some premises that will yield one conclusion, which is a pretty weak conclusion, and then you bloat it up so it looks like you've really proven the existence of God. And one example of this would be Aquinas' cosmological argument. He argues that something must have created the universe. There must have been a first cause, okay? He says, therefore, God exists. Well, it doesn't follow that anything like the traditional Christian God exists. Something could have created the universe and died the next day. You don't even know if it still exists. You don't know whether it's good. You don't know whether it's eternal. You don't know whether it's a person. Another example is religious experience. You know, when people have a religious experience, that leads them to believe in.
All right, I'm going to stop this for a second. This is a little bit of steamrolling here.
Yeah, so first of all, I would tend to agree with him if I heard people argue that the universe began to exist, therefore the Christian God. But I don't think I've ever heard anybody argue that. For instance, Aquinas had 5 ways. Aquinas wasn't saying that any one of these ways was definitive conclusion that therefore the Christian God.
Right.
He had 5 ways specifically because he was building an a cumulative argument for God. And, you know, when Craig gives his cosmological argument, he doesn't then say, therefore the Christian God. He usually follows that by the moral argument and then the argument from the resurrection and uses those to make a cumulative. So if the person was giving the cosmological argument and saying, therefore the Christian God, that would be a bloated conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so when Dr. Craig uses the argument from the resurrection, oh, there goes Joel. when he uses the argument from the resurrection, that is showing that the previous arguments he used, the God that he has argued for is the God of the Christian Bible. So that's what the purpose of the argument from the resurrection is. Yeah, so now I actually just looked up in the Summa Theologica the 5 ways of Aquinas, which I could go over real quick since it's been brought up now twice, because I'm not very familiar with Walter Sinnott Armstrong. I've heard the name. I know he's debated William Lane Craig. I think he's a philosopher. I want to say I think I've seen his name on a logic textbook somewhere. I don't know for a fact though, but essentially Aquinas' 5 ways. And they're pretty lengthy, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to kind of read like the first sentence or two from each of these, so we can actually know what Aquinas' 5 ways are. So Aquinas says that the existence of God can be proved in 5 ways. The first and more manifest way is the argument from motion, and so that's the argument where everything is in motion. Everything that is in motion is set in motion by another. So there must be something at the beginning of this chain which is pure actuality, has no potentialities in him, because anything that has potential, the potential must be actualized by something outside itself. So that's Aquinas' first way, and that's the argument from motion. The second way is from the nature of the efficient cause. And so there's no case known in which a thing is found to be the efficient cause of itself. Because it would be prior to itself, which is impossible. So it's not possible to go on to infinity because because that doesn't really explain anything. But so the second way is the argument from efficient causes, and that something cannot be the efficient cause of itself. The third way is taken from possibility and necessity, that we find in nature things that are possible to be and not to be. In other words, they're contingent, since they are found to be generated and to corrupt, and consequently they're possible to be and not to be. So his third way is essentially an argument from contingency, which we've already mentioned previously. The fourth way is to be taken from the gradation to be found in things, that among beings there are some more and some less good, true, noble, and the like, but more and less are predicated of different things, according as they resemble in their different ways something which is the maximum, as a thing is said to be hotter according as it nearly resembles that which is hottest. And so there must also be something which is to all beings the cause of their being, goodness, and every other perfection. And again, I'm skimming through this because it's kind of lengthy. So I'm just kind of giving an overview of what his ways are. So the fourth way is from the gradation in things. And the fifth way is the governance of the world. And that's the one that I talked about earlier, in which certain animals like bees are, they're not rational, but they know by nature certain things, and they're directed towards some end. Whatever lacks intelligence cannot move towards an end unless it be directed by some being endowed with knowledge and intelligence, as the arrow is shot to its mark by the archer. So since there are animals like bees which have certain things toward which they're directed, since they're non-rational and cannot be the cause of their own actions, something outside them must be the cause of their actions, and that's what we call God. So those are, in a very, very small nutshell, the 5 ways of Aquinas. So I don't think, based on what Armstrong has been saying here, I don't think he's actually getting at one of Aquinas's actual ways. It sounded a lot closer to something like the Kalam argument.
That's really interesting. That fifth point, I picked up on this the first time we talked about it, but again this time around, I've been reading.
Oh, now there goes Caleb. Oh, your mic is muted, Joel.
As soon as he started dropping, I thought I had cut out, because that's my jam. I cut out of there.
I'm back.
Speaking of which, quit
you're
messing in my territory.
I'm sorry about
that.
that.
Out, not
you're stealing his thunder.
So when you were talking about the fifth way there, Clinton, and it hit me the first time around, but it's kind of culminated as we've went along. I've been reading a lot of Jonathan Haidt recently. He's a psychologist. And in a lot of his writing about the righteous mind, he talks about humans being 90% ape and 10% bee. Because people have this.
Am I still here?
You're still here. We lost Caleb.
All right.
Wow. I'm really trying to outdo you today.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of the go-between to ensure whoever's left in that they're still here.
No kidding. So Jonathan Haidt talks about this 90% ape, 10% bee, and I think it's really interesting because humans have this component of social network and social structure that you can't really find in any of the great apes or any other species. You find it in kind of ants, and bees are where you see this social structure develop. And it's one of the huge differences between humans and any other kind of ape, if you will. So, it's interesting that's kind of one of the, just never connected the two.
You're still here, Joel.
I think it's about time to start considering turning this into a 2-parter.
Probably, yeah. Yeah, we'll probably have to pick up with Walter Sin and Armstrong next time.
Yeah.
But we'll get Caleb back on here and make that determination here.
Yeah, we'll do the bees and the apes.
Right, or the
I've
birds.
recently been having to explain the bees and the apes to my son.
Yeah.
Or is that some third thing?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Everybody does it their own way, all right?
That's true. and we're not monkeying around here.
Oh, you want to have a pun contest, bro?
I mean, yeah, I have them over Facebook, so why not?
Let's see.
Am I back? Can you actually hear me this time?
You can. You're kind of interrupting a pun battle, though.
Oh boy,
An impromptu pun battle that was about to begin.
I'm sorry.
We're just monkeying around.
Right. Yep. Joel was about to go eat.
Not to throw a monkey wrench in the works.
Right. Yep.
All right, shall we continue? I think I may have fixed the issue, but
okay, because Joel was actually mentioning that since we're having internet issues, we might consider go ahead and end it here and come back next week, or if you're good to go.
Yeah. This might be the logical terminating point.
I certainly wouldn't be opposed to it. So we've got let's see, we've got 8 minutes left, so we could certainly pick this up and then do some listener Q&A or something if we have time left over.
Sure.
Or because we talked about because maybe that might be a good time also at the end maybe to talk about some of the faith-based films that we like. Since next one will be kind of a shorter one because we only have about 8 minutes left of the show.
As long as somebody has some.
Oh, I do. In fact, I could pull them off my bookshelf and hold them up as a visual aid.
I think I remember one faith-based film that I didn't mind. I came away relatively entertained.
Oh, which one was it, Joel?
I thought The Case for Christ wasn't a bad film.
Oh, yeah. I really liked The Case for Christ. I do have some older ones, which I think are actually pretty good films too.
Yeah. And, at the end of The Spear wasn't a terrible film.
Yeah, that one I thought was pretty good too. That one I haven't thought about in a while. It's not on my list of good films, but that's one that I would probably put up there.
Yeah,
I might have to watch that one.
Seen that I didn't mind.
Yeah, do you remember those missionaries who Nate Saint and the others? It's basically about them and about their to evangelize the community of Africans or whoever it was that they were attempting to evangelize.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it, but it's one of those that's been on my list for a long time, and I've never got to see it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not terrible.
Right.
Hey, that's always a win. All right, well, let's do that then. We'll go ahead and call it quits for the night, and then we will continue with part 2 and listener Q&A and what our faith-based film recommendations are next go round.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Time to roll them credits.
All right.